Even if the market goes up, the market goes down, this asset, this litigation has value.
What is third-party litigation finance?
There's this outside investor looking for a profit. And so they're basically acting like a contingency fee attorney would act from a financial perspective. They're saying, I will finance you, and if you win, you give me a piece of what you get. Now, they're not giving legal representation, but they're essentially doing the finance part of a contingency fee, right? Equity financing, where you have entities that are actually taking an ownership interest in companies rather than taking an interest in the claim. Defense side funding. So if you're a defendant in a case, you don't necessarily have a claim, but you might need help with financing your legal expenses. And so there's now ways of financing defense side litigation funding or ongoing financing, which would be a corporation that gets sued all the time. So let's say an insurance company gets sued all the time, right? Because that's part of their business. So they'll say to the funder, you pay for the litigation costs and you take that up and down risk, and we'll just pay you a flat rate. And now there's even in some jurisdictions, Arizona, where I sit being one of them, non-lawyers can own law firms. So now you're starting to get direct investment in law firms by litigation funders.
I think I read that even hedge funds are getting in on the game. Why would a hedge fund want to invest in litigation?
The definition of a hedge fund is you're hedging your bets, you're hedging your investments with other investments, right? You're sort of saying, I'm going to invest here, but there's risk. So in order to counter that risk, I'm going to invest over here also, right? Well, the problem is after the 2008 crash, ever since then, the stock market has been very volatile. The stocks are not behaving the way they used to behave. And so if you're a hedge fund and you're trying to develop a strategy, you're not necessarily going to be able to use the old rules and the old norms and the old ways of doing things to try to develop a strategy that's going to win your investors' money. On the flip side, right, if you invest in a piece of litigation, even if the market goes up, the market goes down, this asset, this litigation has value.
Can you give me a few examples of like high profile cases where there was a third party funder involved?
There were some recent cases involving Ecuador and Chevron, involving oil extraction in the Amazon in Ecuador. And there were some plaintiffs there called the Lago Agrio plaintiffs. They were basically an indigenous community and others in the surrounding area that were negatively affected by the oil drilling. And there was a third-party funder on the side of the Ecuadorian plaintiffs. And that funder is Burford Group, which is one of the largest funders in the world. The interesting thing in that case is there was a corrupt Ecuadorian judge that essentially was almost bribed. And so there was a massive corruption scandal that ended up making the funder withdraw from the case and then go start negotiating with Chevron. And the last one I'll mention involves a government. So Philip Morris, as you know, the tobacco company, they have been going around the world suing governments for their health and safety regulations that require plain packaging of tobacco products. So Philip Morris wants to have their logo, as many businesses would, on their products. They don't want to have massive warnings and things. One of the nations that they took on was Uruguay. Uruguay is a small nation, doesn't have a lot of money. The Bloomberg Foundation, which has a sort of subgroup called the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, they gave $300,000 to Uruguay to help them fight against Philip Morris. And Uruguay ended up being successful in its case. So that's an example of a third-party funder not interested in profit, but is interested in a certain outcome, interested in a certain policy goal.
Wow. I mean, I guess there was all of the people that funded former President Trump's lawsuits. I mean, is that an example?
Absolutely. You're contributing money to a dispute for the purpose of bringing about a result. That's a type of third-party funding.
Some of this reminds me of like The Big Short, but then you were saying that this is sort of separate from the stock market, maybe not subject to the same kind of volatility. I mean, can you imagine like a black swan scenario where like there's suddenly like a massive change in value that's like not really predictable and that like could affect like a whole class of litigation related assets?
Absolutely. An example would be if there are multiple claims that are brought under a particular law or in the international context under a particular treaty, and then the law or treaty is changed. while the case is pending.
Hmm.
That changes the possible outcomes. Yes, you could have an investment that would have been worth a lot, and then if the law changes a different way, it could end up being worth nothing or even negative because you've had the cost that's been spent
Right.
that you won't get back.
Do you think third-party litigation funding is good or evil?
I think it brings great benefits to the system in the sense that there's a lot of parties out there that either cannot get traditional financing from banks or they can't get contingency fee attorneys to take on the case because it's too risky and the attorneys can't float that much cash
Hmm.
or whatever, right? And now there's a segment there in the market that they can try to tap into in order to get that funding. Great.
Okay.
The flip side of that is that the funders are taking a very large chunk.
Hmm.
So make no mistake, they're taking a large chunk. And in some cases, that chunk is much larger than what a contingency fee attorney would take because a contingency fee attorney's return is capped by statute in every state. The other big argument, and this is sort of a systemic argument, the funders are only, the ones I've talked to, they only take about 5% or less of the cases that come across their desk.
Hmm.
So there's a huge unmet need, right? So it's like, yeah, we're willing to fund some cases, but we're really selective. And so not every meritorious case has the right financial profile to be attractive to a funder.
How are these funders like meddling in the litigation? Maybe meddling is not even the right word.
Well, that is the technical term, officious intermeddling. So this idea that if you're paying for your client's litigation, you're stirring it up. You're making society more litigious, all of that. And so those same arguments are being leveled at third-party funders. And for many years, the argument was abolish third-party funding. There were some arguments in that vein. Now, a lot of the entities that want to abolish it have sort of given up on that argument. And now they go with the regulated argument, license it, put caps on it, all that kind of thing.
Well, what do you think is the right answer?
I think the right answer is that you should have regulations, you should have caps, or at least you should have some sort of, if not caps, at least some sort of professional responsibility norms as to what is appropriate behavior and some method for sanctioning funders if they act inappropriately. In fact, that's actually what Arizona has done. In its law that it passed, it went into effect in January 2021, they can be disciplined by the bar, even though they're not licensed attorneys.
Really?
All of that. Yeah.
Well, what's the remedy though? Like disciplining a non-attorney, what can they do?
Yeah.
They don't have a license they can yank, do they?
That's right. So they can yank the license of the alternative business structure itself.
Oh, sure.
Right. So then they say you can no longer practice as part of this entity.
Oh, okay.
They can also impose fines. So this is in the regulations, it also talks about fines. And the fines go into a fund that are supposed to be helping to improve the legal profession.
Do you think there isn't a way in which all of this turns litigation into a kind of gambling?
The funders I've talked to, because they're investors, they have people who've given them money saying, don't lose my money. You're supposed to make me money, not lose my money. They really don't have a good incentive to invest in things that are going to lose or that have a high likelihood of losing, even if there's a big payout. And I'm not saying funders don't do it at all. I'm sure there are funders out there that do. But the big ones, the ones that are staying in business, the ones that have been around for multiple years, they are not looking for the case, right? They're looking for something that more likely than not they think is going to win.